This purple-haired amnesiac is pretty crazy. With Jiaoqiu's help, she transforms into an unstoppable force. Although he's best suited for Acheron, he can also be played in a variety of teams. Today, I want to dive into his build and explain why he has such incredible synergy with Acheron. Whenever Jiaoqiu attacks, one stack of Ashen Roast is inflicted on the enemy. Now, what exactly is Ashen Roast? Ashen Roast increases the damage that enemies receive. The first stack gives a 15% damage increase, and the subsequent 4 stacks provide a 5% damage increase each. So, an enemy with 5 stacks will take 35% more damage. Enemies with Ashen Roast are considered to be burnt, and they also take damage. Jiaoqiu's Blast-type skill gives the primary target 1 stack, but due to the effect of his talent, all 3 enemies will get an extra stack each. As overpowered as Ashen Roast is, there is one big problem with it. When inflicting enemies with Ashen Roast, most of the stacks will be concentrated on one enemy, while adjacent enemies will have 1 or 0 stacks. This becomes a major issue, especially when there are 2 elite enemies on the field. But don't worry, because this is where Jiaoqiu's ultimate comes to the rescue. When you use his ultimate, the stack counter of all enemies is set to the highest number of stacks on the field. Imagine a scenario where one enemy has 5 stacks of Ashen Roast, while the others have only 1 or 2 stacks. In this case, using his ultimate will set the stacks on all enemies to 5. Jiaoqiu truly cements himself as Acheron's best support with his domain expansion. His domain increases the ultimate damage that enemies receive by 15%. And that's not all. Enemies inside the domain have a 60% chance of being inflicted with 1 stack of Ashen Roast whenever they take action. This effect can trigger up to 6 times and is incredibly useful when enemies haven't yet been inflicted with max stacks. This effect makes Jiaoqiu an absolute monster in pure fiction, especially when combined with one of his traces. Lastly, his technique has a 100% chance of inflicting Ashen Roast on enemies. You should aim to inflict enemies with 5 stacks as soon as possible to maximize the damage that can be dealt. You should start with his technique, then skill, followed by using basic twice, and finally, unleash his ultimate. Jiaoqiu is an insane unit, but his traces make him even better, especially his A6. His A2 provides 15 energy at the start of the battle, and when combined with an energy rope, this trace is incredibly helpful for quickly getting his ultimate. This trace converts effect hit rate above 80% to attack, and to make full use of this trace, you should aim for a 140% effect hit rate. This overpowered trace inflicts enemies entering combat with the maximum stacks that a unit possesses. This means that new enemies entering combat will almost always be inflicted with 5 stacks, making Jiaoqiu the best support in almost all scenarios. Lastly, trace bonuses provide effect hit rate, fire damage, and speed. Now let's wrap up with his Eidolon review. E1 provides allies with a 40% damage buff when they attack enemies inflicted with Ashen Roast. It also speeds up stack generation through his talent. E2 increases the fire multiplier by a massive 300% for enemies inflicted with Ashen Roast. Apart from reducing the target's all-type resistance by 3%, E6 will also transfer Ashen Roast stacks upon the enemy's death. But the most important part, it increases the Ashen Roast stack cap from 5 to 9. With 9 stacks, the damage taken by enemies will increase by an extra 20% at talent level 10. His Eidolons are pretty amazing, but now it's time to address a very important question. E1 or Signature Light Cone. His signature not only increases his effect hit rate by 60%, but it also gives him a 60% chance to inflict 2 different debuffs on the enemy. Enemies take more damage when inflicted with these debuffs. The first debuff, Unarmored, is inflicted when Jiaoqiu attacks enemies. This debuff can be upgraded to the debuff corner if the enemy takes additional damage. This light cone works well with almost all other debuffers. Personally, I would prioritize his signature over his E1. Although his E1 helps with quicker stacking, the effects that his signature provides are much more valuable. Reforged Remembrance and Incessant Rain are the 5-star alternatives that provide a decent amount of effect hit rate. Eyes of the Prey and Tutorial Mission will be your 4-star options. Since Jiaoqiu is a debuffer, he's not going to deal a ton of damage on his own. You can maximize the damage he deals by using the Prisoner set, which is especially useful when you play him with teams. Alternatively, you could go with the 4-piece Musketeer for the SPD boost. Compared to Relics, Planars are a lot more useful to his kit. The energy regeneration provided by Sprightly helps with quick ultimates. You could also go with Pan-Cosmic for the 10% effect hit rate. For main stats, you'll want effect hit rate on the body, SPD boots, Fire Orb, and Energy Rope. Now let's talk teams, specifically Acheron teams. The combination of Acheron and Jiaoqiu is incredibly overpowered. Adding a Venturin and another debuffer should be more than enough for Acheron to wipe out all enemies. Running the Trend Light Cone on a Venturin can help sneak in an extra stack of Slash Dream for Acheron. If you don't have a Venturin, you can use Gallagher instead. Another thing you can do is replace the second debuffer with Sparkle. Although doing this will reduce the speed at which you use Acheron's ultimate, the damage buffs that Sparkle provides will be more than enough to make up for it. The next team features Argenti. Jiaoqiu buffs ultimate damage, which is where the majority of Argenti's damage comes from. On the other hand, Tingyun's ultimate can help Jiaoqiu regenerate 50 energy. The last team that works well in all modes includes Yunli. Huohua and Robin provide attack buffs, and Huohua's ultimate also helps regenerate energy for all allies. However, there's one little downside to this team. For Yunli's counters to be initiated, she needs to be up against enemies that hit you a lot.